This week, it's Double AI Interview Monday. First, we welcome Matt Muller, Field CISO at Tynes, to discuss how to balance AI opportunities versus risk. Next, we welcome Summer Fowler, Chief Information Security Officer at Torque Robotics, to discuss how to address AI challenges while supporting business objectives. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly.
The threat landscape is constantly evolving, making it nearly impossible for security teams to keep up. That's why so many top companies turn to Tynes, a security orchestration and automation platform built by security practitioners for security practitioners. Tynes empowers analysts and engineers to automate their most repetitive, time-consuming tasks. No coding expertise required, just the flexibility to tailor workflows to your team's exact needs. Ready to break free from the limitations of traditional tools? Learn more at securityweekly.com/Tynes. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 390, recorded April 7th, 2025. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Notice, different background. Yes, I'm traveling this week, so I had to use the virtual background, but I'll be back in the studio next week. Joining me for this interview segment are my co-hosts. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, Matt. We're winding down March Madness. You know, women's basketball, UConn took it to South Carolina yesterday. What a great game. And, I had called Duke for the men's, but that didn't work out too well for me. So let's go for Florida against Houston tonight. Let's see.
I got to root Big 12, unfortunately.
I figured you would.
Oh, Texas Tech is one of the only teams that beat Houston at home this year, but they lost to Florida, which I really don't want to see.
That's right.
Per se. Just saying. All right. My second co-host for this interview segment today is Mr. Ben Carr. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, Matt. Great to be here on this fine, sunny Monday. Thank God the weather has moved on and it's finally spinning around here.
Yes. It did here as well in Colorado. It's a beautiful sunny day. One quick announcement. Security Weekly listeners save $100 on their RSA Conference 2025 full conference pass. RSA Conference will take place in a couple weeks, April 28th to May 1st in San Francisco and on demand. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC25 and use the promo code 5U5SecWeekly. I'll be there. Come find me in Broadcast Alley. We're streaming interviews like we always do. Matt Muller is an accomplished security leader with over a decade of hands-on experience in cybersecurity. Currently serving as the field CISO at Tynes, Matt leverages his deep understanding of security operations and product leadership to shape product and cybersecurity strategies. His extensive background, which includes leadership roles at Coinbase and Material Security, enables him to offer strategic guidance to clients on how to integrate security automation, orchestration, and AI into their organizations, driving stronger defenses and innovation in the rapidly evolving security landscape. Matt, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Oh, it is such a pleasure to be here and to add to the Matt quota for this episode.
Got to have Matts everywhere. All right. So first of all, I did log into Coinbase this morning. I had to move some Bitcoin and Ethereum because they hit my price targets because I've been buying on the dips. That's my side little project for some of those who know me. So it was funny when I read your bio before the show, I'm like, oh, wait. I logged in there today.
Yeah, crypto security is a fun place to be, and regardless of how you feel about it, when you have $100 billion of it in one place, people do try to steal it. So there are some definitely some interesting security challenges in that realm for sure.
Yeah, let's just say I have multi-factor and every security feature turned on my Coinbase account. Yes, okay.
Love it.
Thank you for that. But we're going to talk AI in general. So where I want to start this interview, because we're going to get into some really interesting stuff with Summer on the next segment, is hype versus reality. We've heard a lot about the AI hype and how it's going to change the industry and how it's going to be used to automate all kinds of things. Where are we in the hype cycle versus the reality curve?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the hype cycle finally is starting to die down just a little bit. And it's weird to say finally, right? Because ChatGPT launched in 2022. So this is 3 years of technology, which is not a long time in the grand scheme of things. But if you sort of look at the very early days of Gen AI and all these tools, there was both hype and also maybe a hyper fearful environment as well, right? Where I think a lot of prognosticators were saying, attackers are going to be using AI to invent brand new attacks that you all haven't thought about, right? And CISO, you need to go implement our AI solution in order to defend against these imaginary attacks that don't exist yet, right? And if you fast forward, a couple years now, it turns out attackers are using AI the same way the rest of us are, right? Like I may be using AI to help write a better email. Attackers are using it to write a better phishing lure. But at the end of the day, we're still writing the same messages, right? And so, I think what we're starting to see is that AI use cases, in my view, are starting to stabilize a bit, right? Where we're starting to see where AI is in fact helpful and is in fact maybe a step forward from the techniques that we had in the past. And where, maybe we're going to see some failed implementations and where we're going to see maybe AI is a hat on a hat or not really giving us the outcomes that we're looking for. So, I think we're slowly starting to exit that hype cycle.
And Matt, I mean, from my perspective, what I've seen, I'd love to hear your perspective. I'm starting to see the conversation shift from human productivity tool, right, for the individual user, to now the business case. Now, actually, businesses are starting to get interested in saying, how can I leverage this from a business level to start getting productivity across business units or across the entirety of the organization? Now they're thinking of it in business initiatives versus individual user productivity. I think that's where we're starting to see a little bit of a leap too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's no coincidence that agentic AI, which has, sort of been the recent hot new term, is starting to arise in that context as well, right? Because an AI tool that helps me write a better email doesn't necessarily holistically move the business forward.
Right.
An agent, an agentic systems, that actually starts to align with business process. And so, yeah, I think yes, totally agree that it's starting to move from how do we make an individual slightly more productive to more about how do we think about process. Absolutely.
But Matt, you shared an interesting stat before we got live, which is, but we're still seeing a lot of failed projects, right? So yes, we're moving the use cases from individual to business, but we're still seeing a big failure in these projects. So is that good for the current trend or is it bad? I could see it either way.
Yeah, I'd actually be really curious to get y'all's thoughts on this because I saw some stats recently from S&P research that said something like 46% of all AI projects never made it past proof of concept and are considered failed projects at companies. And something like 36% of those were attributed to either cost or data privacy or data security issues. And so the question for CISOs is, does that represent success for us as a security team, right? The fact that, we've said, hey, there should be guardrails around AI implementation.
Yeah.
Should we measure that in failed projects? I don't know. I'm almost tempted to say yes.
So here's my perspective because I'm seeing so much of this lately. As a consulting organization that I work for, companies will come to us and say, hey, listen, we want to start, you name your use case, right? We want to start adopting AI. Here's our use case. And we walk in and we say, all right, data is the foundation of your success. Let's go in and evaluate, right, your data environment, your data privacy, how you're protecting your data. Because all of these data sources, right, that we're looking at, if you don't have the right security and privacy measures around it, could affect you from a breach perspective, from a data privacy perspective, from an insider threat perspective. Once they realize the magnitude of getting their arms around their data estate and then protecting it, they realize it's way out of their budget. They did not plan for this. Now, I would argue these are all the things they should have been doing for a couple of decades, few decades now, but now it's coming to bite them, right? In the age of AI, all of those say easy, do hard things that we talk about, right? Protecting your data estate. Now the chickens are coming home to roost, I guess you could say. Now they actually have to think about it if they want to start adopting AI.
which is the good side of that question, right?
It is.
It could be viewed as a good thing. And I think, Matt, you said that, right? Which is, because the bad news of that is you go forward anyways, and then you have a breach, right? So,
right.
Yeah, but so I'll come out with a little bit of a contrarian, right? Like Matt, you thought it was the positive. I kind of think it's the negative, right? Because as a CISO, like I would like to see the business approaching it with better thought and input up front, right? Not wasting time on projects or efforts where they want to push forward without good security controls, right? Or without good budgetary process. Like whenever I evaluate a process as a leader, I look at it and say, like, how do we make sure we're not filling the pipeline up with chaff, with things that aren't going to matter at the end of the day? I want as much wheat as possible coming out of the bottom of the pipe, right? That's a problem from the business. And I think it echoes the fact that they're not learning and they're not listening and they're not evolving from a security standpoint. They're approaching it in the same context. So I see Jason nodding his head.
Man, listen to me. You know I agree with you wholeheartedly, but we also talk a lot on this show. It's kind of like the seatbelts. Until you had X amount of accidents, seatbelts became a mandate, right? Until you had so many drunk drivers, right? Drunk driving laws became a mandate. We talk about it on the show all the time. Regulation sometimes has to be that spark to light people to do things. We don't have that right now. But having these conversations around your data estate is screwed and you will never be able to successfully implement AI unless you get a handle on this, sometimes is the stick versus the carrot, right? Sometimes you need the stick, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm in favor. Like I don't think we progress ahead just because it's wrong, right? I guess my point is, why aren't we having that other piece of the conversation as opposed to just like blindly bullying our way ahead, right? It's the bull in the china shop, right? It's just let's keep going, like with the same definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing and expecting a different result. We're not learning from the issues that we've had in the past. I feel like we've had a lot of accidents and a lot of crashes, and we've had a lot of crash test dummies, and it hasn't worked out well so far.
Right. Yeah, but I don't disagree with you, Ben, but the pressure from the business side to drive innovation and reduction of costs and all these other things are pressures on the business that we may not get to, like the holy grail place of where we want to be with data and privacy, because the business is like, no, we got to do this because our stock price is going to be affected by this, right? So, I mean, there's other pressures outside that I think are also driving some of these decisions before we're ready to actually secure them.
I also question, and Matt, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, like, is it the mentality, right? Is this the Silicon Valley mentality of fail fast? Like, security be damned, just fail fast, like have a project, see if it goes awry, and if it goes awry, like we'll course correct afterwards. Like, do you think that factors into this at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, I suspect that a lot of these project failures may be sort of like failing at the last mile, right? Where the security review is happening right before launch, and they're like, "Oh,
which
shoot,
is super expensive, right?"
But experimentation in and of itself is not a bad thing, particularly if CISOs can get shift left a little bit and get a little bit further upstream of the problem. If you are experimenting with a set of guardrails that's been implemented for you, you can fail at the ideation stage, right? Because you're using an AI risk management framework that has been given to you by the security team. You can self-service and understand, in this use case, right? Like, it actually doesn't fit within our guardrails. So,
Matt, if you fail really far left, I would advocate for that's awesome. Like, I don't mind failing fast if it's way to the left, right? Like, if you're involving security, I would say throw anything you want up on the whiteboard and let's discuss it. And be okay with security saying, yeah, that's not going to work. That's horrible. That's great, because then you're iterating really quickly and getting to something where you're actually putting your effort into potentially more positive results down the line, right?
Totally. Yeah, I think, to other Matt's point, like the board is still, pushing that we all experiment and figure out how to use AI. So the real question is, where in the pipeline do we fail an experiment, right? Or say, this was the experiment, here's the success and failure criteria. And you know what? We hit the failure criteria, and that's great, right? I think the key is that the security team can't scale itself as fast as the rest of the business is going to scale their ideas.
Matt, you hit a great point. I was actually speaking to a client a few weeks ago, and their board actually mandated that 20% of their projects, IT projects, needed to be AI-driven projects. The board is starting to mandate the infusion of AI into organizations. And there's a KPI that CIOs need to meet in some instances. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I force feeding it, I don't think is a great thing. But these are conversations that I'm actually hearing out there in the field that, hey, my board just told me I need to start, force feeding AI through my organization. They go out and they buy a product that says powered by AI. Now they get a check in the box and they can do something with it and say, yeah, I'm doing AI now.
Right. Gmail suggests my emails to read next. Is that AI? I've implemented AI, congrats to me.
But I think that can be dangerous because now you have CIOs out there saying, I need to do something, right? My board is mandating it. And they're not necessarily making it a strategic project. They're making it a check in the box project.
Right. And when a board starts mandating outputs versus outcomes, that is absolutely dangerous territory, right? Particularly if it's like for cybersecurity use cases. If imagine if 20% of your new detections that you write or something have to be AI based. That may or may not be a good fit for your organization, right? But having that mandate is certainly challenging to work through, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. We love board mandates. When you think about what CISOs need to think about, where should they be spending their time, like getting an organization ready for these AI projects? Because in some form or fashion, the pressure is going to push this stuff down. How do CISOs prepare for that inevitable day where they're going to be like, all right, we got to do this. This is how we're going to approach it.
Yeah, I mean, I always hate the phrase "security is everybody's responsibility," right? Because when it's everyone's, it's no one's. The security team does have to be responsible for these things. However, there are ways to sort of infuse education throughout an organization to make people better advocates, right? Or a little bit more self-service. What do they do when security is not in the room? And I think AI lends itself very well to some demonstrations around its limitations, right? And if the security team isn't focused on helping the rest of the business navigate AI sharp edges, then it's missing an opportunity to help people sort of self-service their own AI risks, right? Like how, a really dead simple example is like the larger the numbers that you have ChatGPT try to multiply, the more obviously incorrect it gets, right? And that's such a simple example that you can show anyone, right? Like say, ChatGPT, what's 7 times 7? It'll get that 100% of the time. But you get to multiplying millions by millions, right? And it's objectively wrong according to a calculator. Now you've sown that little seed of doubt, right? And making sure that folks are sanity checking their AI outputs. And so I think, an education prong around limitations of AI implementation, making sure that, sooner rather than later you apply some kind of AI risk management framework, right? Like make sure that the guardrails are super clear, that there's no surprises to the organization in where you're going to say, hey, this is outside of risk tolerance, right? Like, and here's the standard. You can read it yourself. I think are super important. And then the final question is, what does this look like inside the security team, right? Versus the rest of the organization? Because I do think that cybersecurity use cases require a little bit more thought before you just sort of, throw AI at them, right? And like having that risk bar for the rest of the organization might look a little different in the security team, right? Where if you get things wrong, the consequences can be a little higher than a failed AI implementation elsewhere.
So Matt, I had talked a little bit about, the data conversation not always being top of mind with organizations, right? Data protection. What are some of the misconceptions or unaddressed risks that you've seen clients, when you walk in the door, you're having a conversation, you start mentioning certain things and just like, whoa, I never even thought about that. I never, not even a risk I addressed or thought about.
Yeah, I'll actually a slightly different take on that. I actually think that folks over-rotate on the training. And the reality is, if you're using one of the foundation models from one of the large players like OpenAI or Amazon or Anthropic or whomever, your enterprise agreement with them covers training, right? And I think that's where a lot of people stop in terms of how they're thinking about AI risk. And I do think that the question of how do I connect my data to AI models in a safe way is one that I think is a little under scrutinized, particularly as organizations start like no one regardless of the model you're using, if you have an enterprise agreement, I don't think anyone's going to be training off your data, right? The real question is who else in your organization is going to accidentally get access to that data, right? And there's a lot of different ways that can happen. And so, I think that's where, if I was to point a security team in that particular direction, it would be threat modeling sort of like those data connections, and making sure that, yes, in fact, the sum of the outputs is in fact what you expect relative to those inputs.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, so I was going to go into a couple other areas too, kind of around this topic, which is, first of all, from a training perspective, think about generative AI is not all AI, right? Like there's a lot of other things. So when people hear AI, the first thing they think is generative AI, and they think about they think OpenAI and they think Anthropic and all these use cases. But there's other types of artificial intelligence kind of capabilities out there. And my fear is that we spend so much time around the generative side of the equation that we forget about all these other AI capabilities that no one's thinking about because we're so wrapped around the Gen AI axle. You know what I mean?
Totally. And, don't let my youthful good looks fool you. Like, I remember when we called this machine learning, right? Like, there's statistical techniques that have been, time tested, right? And a lot of this falls under that same, generative AI is sort of like the thing that, to your point, people are most familiar with. But the reality is, like, data science and machine learning and, artificial intelligence have been around for a very long time in very different forms. And I think one of the most eye-opening moments for me was when my team first got assigned a data scientist in the security organization. And the way they thought about data and the way they thought about, models and predictions and algorithms and training data and bias and all of these different topics, I mean, it was just incredible, right? I'm going from looking at, log line by log line to somebody that's able to actually tell me, hey, here's how you can actually build a predictive model here, right? And so, I think learning to speak the language of data at a very high level is going to be so applicable across not just generative AI, but all the different ways in which, AI and machine learning tools are going to be implemented by or used by or secured by the security team.
The second piece, Jason kind of hint at this earlier, but there's a risk management component to this. The challenge is we don't do a very good job of risk management in general in the cybersecurity space. Now, I agree that we have to understand the risks associated with AI, but since we're already horrible at it, like what other guidance can you give people around the risks of AI?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, I think everything old is new again, right? Like there's so many analogies from traditional application security and data security and threat modeling and all of these different, domains that we've done for forever, right? And I think for CISOs, figuring out how they can help their teams bridge those two knowledge domains is really important, right? Because on the one hand, an AI, an application built on top of an AI model is still an application, right? And if it's web exposed, it's still a web application. But on the other hand, AI models may have that application behaving in new and unique and interesting ways. And so it is, two things can be true at the same time, right? Like we have techniques, we have approaches, we have, frameworks that are absolutely still applicable in the same way that they've been for forever. And also there's some new things coming along. And so I think the more we can help people sort of find that familiar ground and then pivot into what's new is going to be a really, in my view, probably the most successful approach, right? Rather than treating AI as this mystical thing that needs its own treatment outside of the rest of your, enterprise processes, tools, and what have you.
Yeah, because I can Oh, go Ben. You gotta...
I was just going to follow on and say, Matt, you brought up an interesting point of saying, like, it really pivoted when you brought in a data scientist to the security team, right? And it was a way to think about it differently because you had someone who had expertise in that area.
Right.
And I think one of the things I see is a lot of challenges from CISOs, especially at smaller organizations, is they don't have the ability to do that, right? And AI is one of those areas where it's different, right? The muscle memory, like what you're trying to apply, how the data is being used, like all that's different. So do you have any advice or thoughts on, like, given the lack of additional resources and even additional time to get up to speed on this, how does the CISO who's got 4 guys reporting to him, like, actually get up to speed on this or bring in these concepts around AI to effectively apply it when the business is still asking him, hey, we're moving forward with this. What do we do?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And in a world of limited resources, you think about whether you mitigate risk, you transfer risk, so on and so forth. This may have to be a risk transfer conversation, and it may end up being a conversation around what vendors do I trust to go put the right guardrails around AI, right? And you as the CISO have, to figure out AI while you're also figuring out your other security policies, while you're also, handling the reactive and incident response side of security as well, right? And so, there's no shame in going to a managed detection response provider. There's no shame in having an MSSP. I don't think there should be any shame in saying, look, this is something where we need outside resourcing in order to be able to wrap our arms around this, right? Because the business is going to implement it. The risk is there. And we just need that outside guidance.
Yeah,
so Matt, just to tether into Ben's comment and take it to that next level, you're going to have initiatives where the C-level executives, the CEO, the board of directors are saying, we need to get this initiative done, kind of like what I talked about earlier. How do you recommend CISOs balance that pressure of speed to innovation, speed to adopt AI with the diligence that's needed and or transfer of risk, because that's going to take time? And how do you dial it back to a safe speed, right? And how do you convince those executives to want to take that safe speed versus pedal to the ground?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a lot of this is, the art of CISOing, right? Where you have to figure out what battles you're going to pick, and what projects are fine to fail, right? If there's sort of a neatly defined perimeter of saying, like, look, this one experiment that people are doing with AI, it's risky. But the reality is, is touching such a small domain, such, very simple examples, like it's not touching customer data, right? Like the worst that happens is somebody figures out how to abuse this chatbot to get, a refund on a purchase that they made, right? Something like that. That's measurable and boundable risk. Versus, hey, we're actually we're considering replacing, this portion of our workforce with AI. That is where it may be advisable to spend some political capital, right? And say this is something that, if the business truly wants to move forward on this, we got to do this right, because the cost of doing so is just doing so incorrectly is just too great.
Yeah, I have examples of the chatbot one. We let it fail finally. Maybe not as fast as I wanted to, but yes.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out the examples already that exist, right? Of it turns out if your chatbot tells people incorrect airline ticket prices, courts will enforce those prices. And so that, for whoever is implementing those things, a little article reminder that your decisions are legally enforceable is certainly worth throwing out there.
Yes, good caution to those thinking about going down this path. Yeah. Matt, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks so much. It was a great conversation. Really enjoyed chatting with y'all.
Not all vulnerabilities are the same. A critical vulnerability on a marketing laptop isn't the same risk as a critical vulnerability on a production server accessed by a domain admin missing EDR. Sevco Security shows you these interconnected risks. Sevco centralizes intelligence on all your devices, identities, software, vulnerabilities, and security controls, enriching them with threat intelligence and business context in real time, so your security team has exactly what it needs to effectively prioritize and remediate vulnerabilities based on the unique requirements of your business. Think of it as a to-do list for risks, but less annoying. Find a smarter way to manage exposures. Visit securityweekly.com/Sevco today. All right, now for our next interview. But first, a quick announcement. Adrian Sanabria, host of Enterprise Security Weekly, will be running a panel cast with Fastly titled Security Without Speed Bumps, using WAF Simulator to transform DevSecOps workflows. That's a mouthful. Join him for this exciting webcast on April 16th. To register, go to securityweekly.com/WAF, Web Application Firewall, for all those not familiar with the TLA. Summer Craze Fowler is a hockey mom who is a CISO in her spare time. She is in her third CISO role, serving in the capacity now at Torque Robotics, a self-driving trucking company. Summer teaches cyber governance and metrics at Carnegie Mellon's University's Executive Education Program, and she is adjunct faculty at both Carnegie Mellon and Duquesne University. With a passion for governance, Summer serves on both nonprofit and for-profit boards. Summer, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me. How's everybody doing?
We're doing great. How are you doing? Last week you had a little fender bender. We were supposed to interview you last week. Everything okay?
Everything is great now. Thankfully, no major injuries. Nobody in my vehicle was injured or the cause of anything. So that's great. Had a great weekend. Took my oldest daughter to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and she decided to commit to the school. So we'll have a vol in our house next year.
There you go.
Well, she won't be in our house. She'll be in Tennessee.
Now, I won't say much. I'll just kind of do this. And for all those volunteers, I'm sorry for your first round in this college football playoff.
I know. It's a little rough. But, she looked at Ohio State as well. She had lots of options. And I did make fun of her because she's doing biomedical engineering. And the school in Tennessee is called the Tickle College of Engineering. Named after someone, the benefactor. And I laughed at it. And then she reminded me that my maiden name is Craze. And so we both got a good laugh.
Yeah, both good laugh. We're going to talk AI. And what's really interesting to me is you're in the throes of this stuff, like on a daily basis, right? And your perspective, I think, is a huge potential benefit to others who are still struggling with this a little bit, because here you work for Torque Robotics, you're building self-driving trucks, you're deploying this stuff. Like you are using these technologies today. Where do you start, Summer? Like where should CISOs start?
It's such a hot topic, and really there are so many different angles to this. Like you mentioned, we're using AI, we're developing AI, right? We're actually, building models. Our simulation is based on some generative AI tooling that we have built. The cars that are driving themselves are based, they're machine language based and deep learning based. And so, there's that angle, which is the development side of things, which we can go into. And then there's, the other 99% of the world that may not be developing AI, but they're using it, whether they like it or not. And so, every vendor that we talk to is excited to tell us about the AI that is embedded now into their platform, whether it's real AI or not. And the fact of the matter is we have to understand what it is that means to our organization from a whole bunch of different angles. So whether you're developing it or using it or just curious about what's going on, there are absolutely angles that you have to look at in terms of the questions that you need to ask, and how do you know, as we like to say, is it trustworthy? Is it trustworthy AI?
Right. So let's go down both paths, because I think both are interesting, right? I think you're in a unique position because you are building some of these capabilities, and a lot of people are probably just trying to buy and have to figure it out. But from a build perspective, how do you start to, how do you even start to tackle the problem of building your own artificial intelligence capabilities? Like, what's the foundation of a security program around that?
Yeah, so it's interesting that it's both more complex and exactly the same. So, when you think about, okay, there are all of the same problems that you have, when you think about secure coding. You have to have a secure code design principle. So let's go back to the beginning of a secure software development lifecycle. What are all of those principles? You have to have the governance structure. You have to have the guidelines that you're following. You have to have requirements and a way to test them, no matter how you're doing them. I mean, whether it's a waterfall approach, a spiral, some sort of agile approach, there are still all of the elements that you need to have, and that all still exists with the AI that is being developed. What's important to think about with AI is that there are a number of different elements that you have to think about. There's the model itself. So you're building a model, right? That is you're going to train, you're going to massage it with data. It's going to be able to learn and grow, natively by itself. And so that's an important aspect of this. So that model is really and truly just data, right? So you have to think about, what is that data? What are the inputs to that data? We hear lots of different things about things like bias, right? Everybody wants to talk about bias in AI. And frankly, let's break that down as well. So there can be bias in the development, but let's also be frank that in any development that we have, there's going to be an element of bias because it's humans that are developing it. One of the interesting things about AI, and I think, all of you can jump in on this as well. Think about the fact that, computer science over the past, 6 decades, what it has looked like and the people it has drawn in. We've seen more people interested from different types of backgrounds. AI is this subset of computer science. And until the past handful of years, frankly, only a couple of universities around the world even offered AI programs. So now you had a subset of a culture being taught by 1 or 2 universities. Of course, there's going to be some bias because we're all learning, the same concepts from the same people.
Right.
So Jason, yeah, I mean, you're laughing about it. You see that in regular computer science as well, right?
And I'm laughing about it because, you mentioned earlier that it's the same but more complex. And I would argue that we haven't done a great job with delineating responsibility and accountability in traditional technology environments as to who owns what, who's responsible for what, who's accountable for what, who needs to be informed where. I look at it like a big racy chart, right? And everybody plays the Scarecrow in the Wizard of Oz where they're pointing at each other, right? So now I take it and I line it up to this complex environment now, a lot more complex. So how do you handle those hurdles of establishing the clear lines of who's accountable, responsible, being informed now that you're adding data scientists and AI developers to the mix, the complexity of what's happening within your technology and data environment? How do you tackle that?
It really becomes like the 2 Spider-Mans pointing at each other, right? That you see in the memes. Because should the CISO really be responsible for AI? I mean, I say the answer is no. We should not. Now, we can be responsible for securing it, which we'll continue to talk about. But because we are oftentimes one of the more technical voices in a company, someone turns to us and says, "Hey, this AI stuff, what is it? Solve it. Go make it happen." And really, you do have to understand who is going to be in charge. So one of the things we did at the company was put together an AI committee. And it is led by a principal engineer, so the most senior level of engineer in our company. But there is a committee. And that is the committee that is looking at both the utilization of AI, where we want to pull it in, and then also making sure that our development covers those best practices. So I would say, where do you start? You need to start with that governance. Who's going to own it? Who's accountable for it? And then the responsibility that comes into play. What are you putting into your development life cycle? What tooling is being used? How are you handling open source versus commercial? And so it's all the same, but a little bit different in terms of just ensuring that it's embedded into your process as that new side of things.
I'm curious, where does it report into? Where does it sit in the organization? Does it report into the CEO? Does it report into the board? Like, where does it sit?
In our organization, it reports into the CTO. Yeah. So the Chief Technology Officer, who is in charge of our engineering. And so it's his principal engineer who is the lead for this. And there's representation from product cybersecurity, enterprise cybersecurity, law, like the legal department has a big arm of this, HR. And so there are a lot of the non-engineering groups that are involved in this process. So it looks like other third-party risk management activities that you're doing, but it goes very deep technically.
I am so glad to hear you just say that, because one of the questions I had was going to be, how do you handle the legal and regulatory requirements that are going to be rapidly changing here, right? I mean, so you have legal on the committee. Perfect.
Absolutely. And we also reach out to, external counsel. We have a privacy group that has an AI arm that we work with. Now, if you're a listener and you're involved, with anything in the EU, you've got to look at the EU AI Act, which looks at different levels of AI and different types of AI, and actually provides restrictions on what you can and can't do. We will likely, similar to how we saw GDPR kind of come in through CCPA with California, and other states that have done adoption of parts of this. We will
Summer,
likely see some.
You're saying there's not just one global standard that works across everything, and we just can go to this book and look at it.
Banning you,
Section 3, subsection 2, Part A. Oh, I know what to do.
Always looking for Nirvana, buddy.
I would love to be the Tsarina of AI. No, and we're probably going to have 50 some different laws on this.
And that's exactly where I was going to go.
Every jurisdiction, every international government is going to want their own read with their own. This I think is the largest problem in the technology sector, is differing standards and governance. It's super hard.
The problem is, in my opinion, in the States is, unless we put in a national regulation around this, we will end up with 50 plus versions of this, like we do on the privacy breach side.
Yeah. Now, the one good thing, so let's talk about a positive in all of this. I do think that the NIST AI risk management framework is really solid. I think NIST has learned a lot through all of the frameworks that they've put together over the decades. The NIST cybersecurity framework 2.0 that came out had some big improvements, and we saw those improvements already baked into the AI risk management framework. So if I'm looking for a positive, and by the way, I don't love regulation, right? I want regulation for good, which means the least amount that we have to have. But I think that as a voluntary framework, so if you are curious about AI, go read the NIST AI risk management framework. And if you're worried about what you need to do in your organization, it's a great starting point, whether you're developing, as we talked about, or using. And it goes through the various characteristics of what is trustworthy AI, talks through questions that you could be asking. So it is there's a positive. There's a silver lining in this crazy cloud.
Well, that's good. So that was kind of my next question. Like, what's the difference now from what do you consider building versus buying, right? Are you using basically the same set of questions then for what you're doing internally to what you're doing externally, except for I got to have my application, frameworks in place. Are they the same, or are there differences?
So there are some differences, but I would say that, the flavor is a lot the same. So we mentioned that there's the model itself, right? We're building a model, or you're going to be using a model. And so when we're building our model, there are design details that we're going through that I would never get into with a vendor.
Right.
But there are some questions that you want to be asking vendors about how they have developed their model. What are some of the things that they have been considering and how they've built it. And so, the other questions might be around, is it an open model? Is it a closed model? The data that is being used to train the models, that's another really big one, right? So when we're looking at our data, we are trying to pull together the statistical significance of the data that we're using, right? To make sure that our models are being trained on all the right stuff and all of the good things. Well, are we using our own data? Are we using data that we get from other people? That's the same kind of question I want to know when I'm using a vendor. I want to ask that vendor, how are you retraining your model? Is it, it's most likely not going to be static, but are you training on only my data? Is it data from other people? How are you sanitizing that? What are you looking at? So it's a lot of the same flavor. It's just going to be, the difference in if I'm baking something at home myself or I'm going out to the bakery to buy it. What are the ingredients? And I know what's the ingredients I'm using here. I just maybe want to know, is it a facility with nuts if there's a nut allergy, right?
Right. Yeah.
Now, Summer, with that, you're evaluating, let's say, third party, right? You're evaluating your AI supply chain.
Yeah.
I assume there's a cadence to that. It's not just, hey, we're evaluating, you're hired, come on in. I'm assuming there's a cadence to this evaluation where you're constantly assessing the risk posture of these supply chain vendors, correct?
Yeah, and let's be honest, we can't do this all the time with every single vendor.
Right.
So what do? We have to prioritize. And so you think about who are your critical vendors, who are the vendors that have access to your crown jewels of data, whether that's customer data, employee data, what is it that they're, contributing to, and then hone in on those. And hopefully you're having monthly or maybe quarterly business reviews with those vendors. And that's when you want to talk to them about it and you want to go deep. Now, the interesting thing is if you're just talking to someone who's trying to sell you, they're going to know the buzzwords just enough. And they're not going to know these details. So you got to get those engineers on the calls. And you want to make sure that as you have those QBRs or monthly MBRs, that the right people are in the room to address these things. It does become the question of, okay, the training, what are some of the statistics that you've had around what have you found? And you want them to be able to tell you that they found errors. It's like when you ask someone, how many cyber incidents have you had? If a company tells you none, they probably aren't looking at the right things. Right? So you want to hear that they're finding some bad data or bias that they've seen and they're cleaning it out.
Imagine a world where every threat, ransomware, supply chain attacks, zero-day exploits is stopped before it can even begin. ThreatLocker makes that world a reality with a zero-trust approach to cybersecurity. By giving you granular control on every executable that can happen in your environment, ThreatLocker protects your business around the clock. No more guessing, no more gaps. Just rock-solid protection that keeps your operations running smoothly and your data secure. Discover how ThreatLocker's least privilege approach can safeguard your organization against known and unknown threats. Take the first step towards total peace of mind. Visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker today. I would imagine in your world, a lot of your data is coming through different sensors and different sources, right? Because you're building an autonomous vehicle, right?
Yeah.
And so your sources of data are going to be very different than I think what other people are used to thinking about when it comes to building these AI models, right? Because we're thinking customer data or something like that. You're actually talking about system telemetry kind of data that's actually helping you make decisions on how to move this. Does that change the complexity of what you, I imagine it adds to the complexity of like your supply chain because of all those sensor inputs, but does it change the complexity of how you secure or manage the security around all that data?
I'll make it even more complicated for you. So it's not only just the sensor data that's coming in. We have to have synthetic data because, the old model, the old school behind self-driving was how many miles do you need to drive before you can determine that something is safe? Well, that's the dumb way of doing it. And we've all recognized this. The whole industry has said, wrong question. Why were we even doing that? What you really want to do is benchmark against human performance. Well, that means that, we have to understand lots of different scenarios. So we are actually building generative AI to generate scenarios in the physical world so that we can create synthetic data and then operate our trucks in that synthetic environment. So that's an additional level. So, okay, so if it's physics-based, that means I have to test that world. Is it truly physics-based? If I show a bouncing ball, a rubber ball in the synthetic environment, is it actually bouncing the way a real rubber ball would, at the right speeds, at the right heights, all of those things on different types of surfaces? So if I'm on gravel, it's going to look different than if I'm on cement or, I mean, you get it, right? I mean,
right.
all the scenarios. So we have to make sure that's correct. Then there's that input into our system. And so we have to be validating and verifying every step of the way. So how do you secure something like that? Well, number one, we always look and assume that everything has already been compromised, right? You just make that assumption. And if you operate from that principle, then you have to get into, okay, let's assume that the code is bad. Let's assume there's already something bad in it. What are the ways then that we're going to discover that something is bad? So that's going to then be, as if something bad in the code tells the vehicle to do something bad, I need to have redundancy of capabilities to be able to say, hey, that doesn't make sense for us to do that, because that's going to drive us into a wall. So I don't want to do that one. So it's just the checks and balances throughout the system. You have to make sure you have the right code signing, the right secure comms, the right secure diagnostics, all of that. So the securing really starts with assume everything is terrible, which is really easy for cybersecurity people to do, and then work from there, right? So you do hazard analysis and threat analysis and all of those risk assessments, and then build that into the capabilities. And that means being embedded with the software engineers so that they can recognize what bad is.
That's mind blowing.
It's really fun. It's really fun.
Oh, I bet it is, but it's mind blowing because just the number of inputs that have to be validated to make sure that the system is validated is just, it's immense.
It just makes my
you don't want to see our AWS spend.
Oh, I bet. It makes my gear spin, right? Because you have your traditional organizations who, the things that keep CISOs and CIOs and maybe some CEOs up at night is the threat actors and the breach and those type of things. When I look at your environment, I'm like, what keeps you up at night? Is it necessarily the threat actor, or is it something beyond that?
Well, I do have separate teams. No, not so much the threat actor. I mean, what keeps me up at night is the cybersecurity as an element of safety.
Yeah.
Right. And making sure, because, we're all about safety. As a matter of fact, a quick shout out to my company. We literally just hired a new chief safety officer today. So Steve Kenner has joined us from where he was at Cruise, decades of experience in safety. And so, I'm going to sleep a little better tonight. I can tell you that, just knowing that he's here. But that's really where it comes in, because, it's one thing to be able to say, hey, I asked perplexity.ai a question and it gave me the wrong answer. That's one way of getting mad at AI. And I can tell you about a science experiment that I did with my kid, my son, to where AI got it wrong. But it's another thing then to say, hey, I'm going to put this robot on the road next to humans. And so that's really where it weighs on you. Yeah. You think about that in medical devices. I mean, even in finance, it's really important. But hopefully if something goes wrong with that, nobody's actually going to pass away. But in these safety critical systems, that's really what keeps you up at night. It's more mistakes than anything else.
Yeah, and I spent 7.5 years in nuclear power, right? And I remember all the inputs from the plant that feed the control room to make sure that the plant is operating safely, right? Because it's a safety thing, right? You don't want a 3 Mile Island incident at your nuclear power plant, right?
Right.
But that's what I meant by this, the amount of telemetry. I remember rebuilding those systems and how much we had to synthesize in order to make sure the control room was doing here similar kind of things. A lot more data, a lot more inputs, and just as big, if not, maybe not quite bigger. I mean, a nuclear power plant melting down might be a little bigger than but still the safety aspects of this, having those things on the road with other drivers and again, how they react, right? Like,
yes. Oh yeah.
Right. Just how drivers react. You can't always model all those in advance to teach and train the autonomous car to know what it's going to do, right? It's just mind blowing.
It's interesting. My husband used to work in nuclear as well. So that realm, absolutely, thinking about the safety of that. And we actually had to go work with, we just announced a little under a month ago, we are working with Flex, and we've built new design, hardware architecture design, because you're exactly right. The inputs that are coming in and the compute power that is required to do this, it's some brand new chips that are being developed. And so there's actually, it's NVIDIA and Flex that we're working with on brand new architectures that we've put into the stack. So it's a brand new hardware stack. It's production intent, which is awesome, put onto an existing chassis, but we've helped design some of those sensors with Daimler. Brand new software. I mean, it's like it's a truly a brand new robot, which is really, really cool. And then at the same time, you do think, okay, how are we going to train this and make sure that it's as good as a human? Now, here's the great thing. I'm a mom. I tell my kids I have eyes in the back of my head. I don't. But when the car does have eyes in the back of its head. The truck can see all around it. The truck doesn't get tired. The truck doesn't get mad. The truck doesn't get drunk. And so all of those things, it's not switching a station on the radio or texting. And so we already know that we'll have some intrinsic, benefits over humans. Then it gets to making sure we're detecting, perceiving, and doing the right things. And I actually think the hardest thing is making the truck extremely predictable, because that's what we want on the roads. If you're in your car, and any of you who've taught teenagers, I have 3 teenagers, 2 drivers now. That's the big thing, teaching them that defensive driving skill, because sometimes humans aren't predictable. Right. And you want to think about that. So we want the trucks to be as predictable as possible so that humans know how to act around us. And so that, we are reducing the likelihood that something bad happens in that interaction.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. You mentioned the NIST AI RMF framework. Any other sources or resources that people can use to help them kind of build their criteria for how they want to manage their AI projects?
So ISO has an AI standard as well. And it's so funny, because if you go look at ISO 27001 and the NIST CSF, you will see the relationship between the NIST AI risk management framework and the ISO guide. I would also recommend going out to the international standards. It's not even standards, international regulation and some standards. So some of the places you go, the EU AI Act, you just want to know about it. It's going to be, one of those things that comes up across, just like GDPR. Australia, Singapore, and then interestingly, go out and read some of the Chinese AI policies. The Chinese have led in this space. Their policies are some of the oldest that we've seen around. Now, I'm not saying to adopt them, but I think that you could understand them. You don't want to say every algorithm that we develop now belongs to the government, right? Right. Or has to be registered with the government.
Or all your data is going to Chinese servers in China.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, all right. So here's a thing. When you're using, sorry, I lost my earbud here. When you're using AI, that is, you want to know, where is my data going, right? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So DeepSeek R1 was all the rage a month ago. And I will tell you, I use DeepSeek. I have it running at home on a separate laptop. And by the way, we're all using DeepSeek in various ways, whether we like it or not. But those companies, are using a US only model. However, if you download the DeepSeek app on your phone, that is, number one, not only content that's going to go back to China, it is, number two, giving access to more than you know on your phone. And number three, the last I checked, and I haven't checked in a couple of weeks, all of that data was being transferred unencrypted.
Ooh, lovely.
Right.
Ouch.
So if you have DeepSeek R1 on your phone, just go delete it. Get rid of that app.
Too
However,
late
it doesn't
now.
mean that R1 is bad. They have it all. They have it all.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it's bad. It's actually a really cool piece of tech. You just want to make sure that you're using the model in the right way.
Right.
Yeah.
And knowing where the data is going and how they're using it. But again, you said the Chinese have led on this, but they've also led to make sure that they own all that data and all these capabilities too, which is probably not how you want to build or buy your AI strategies.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And actually, that's a great topic, Matt. What is your strategy? What is your company's AI strategy? Now, doesn't mean you have to have a roadmap and a full lay it out and say, this is what we're going to adopt and when, but you do need a strategy, just like you do for other things. And I think that's the second thing after governance. Understand who in the company is going to own AI and help you with some of those roles, responsibilities, et cetera. Then you need to start your strategy. And how many times have you heard this? Hey, we want to use this AI. It's really cool. Okay, great. What do you want to use it for? Well, it's going to make us better. Great. How is it going to make us better? I think it's probably going to make us faster. I'm not really sure. All I know is it's going to make us better. Well, how are we now? Well, I don't think we're good. Well, how do you measure yourselves now? Oh, we don't really measure it. We just know it's not great. Well, then how do you know the AI is going to make you better? Well, it's just going to make us better. How are you going to measure better? I don't know. I mean, it's the conversation that either you're having or you're not having, and that's even worse.
Right.
So you have to sit down and say, all right, let's actually determine what it is that we want to achieve out of this. And sometimes you just want to achieve learning. Doesn't mean you have to have all the answers, but determine up front, how am I going to measure the benefit that I'm getting out of this? What is it that I'm looking for it to do? How will we know if it's good enough? And even if you don't know the answer, if it's not something that's super quantitative, write down the question so that as you're doing the analysis, you can say, well, wait a minute. Do we think this is any sort of even qualitatively measurably better?
Right.
And so that's the other thing I would say is treat your AI adoption like you would a program so that you can start to determine that ROI. That's probably my number one piece of advice that I give out to other CISOs or people who are looking to use something is write it out like a project so that you actually understand the benefit that you're going to gain.
And that's super important. It's super important, Summer, because on the previous segment, we actually talked about this. If you don't have an AI adoption strategy, one will be forced upon you someday. And it was a conversation around a board who actually said, forced upon a CIO, this year you need to adopt 20% AI tools within our environment. A board of directors are starting to mandate AI adoption within an organization.
Wow. Go
figure it out, right? So if you don't have a plan,
one's
going to be forced upon you, right?
Yeah, because the board is probably getting some FOMO.
Yep.
And they're thinking, oh boy, we've got to get on top of this. We want to be able to do that. And now it's our job inside of the organization to be good stewards of that mandate, right? And use the existing funds in the right way. So you're exactly right. If you don't have that strategy, it's coming for you.
That's right.
It's coming for you. Summer, this was awesome. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.